Good evening. Welcome to a special live Facebook update on the COVID-19 pandemic hosted by the Stanislaus County Office of Emergency Services. I'm Linda Muma with Stan OES.
And I'm Amy Collier-Carroll, Public Information Officer with Stanislaus County. We will both be moderating tonight's live update, which will be recorded and later posted to the Stan Emergency Facebook page and YouTube channels.
You won't see us on your screen tonight, but you'll hear our voices as we direct your questions to our panelists.
Tonight, our sign language interpreters were unavailable, unfortunately, but closed captioning will be available to you once tonight's recording is completed and the video is posted to our social media pages.
Tonight's focus is on schools, the plan to reopen some campuses within Stanislaus County as we transition between tiers, as well as the plan to keep students and staff safe.
Tonight, we're joined by Stanislaus County Public Health Nurse Julie Falkenstein, Modesto City Schools Superintendent Sarah Noguchi, and Turlock Unified Superintendent Dana Trevathan. Let's begin with Julie. Julie, where are we with the COVID-19 cases in Stanislaus County?
Well, we're in a bit of a rise again. Our rates were released by the state today, and our daily case rate has gone up to 7.6. That actually puts us number-wise back up in the purple tier. Our hospitalizations have increased almost 10% over the last 3-day average, but our positivity rate is still 4.2, so that looks a little good.
Is there anything additional that you can add about what we learned today from the state's update that you had with the Department of Public Health?
Yes, we learned that we're at danger of going back into the purple tier, that tier 1, the worst one, and the most restrictive. And that now is the time for us to act as a community. If our numbers next Tuesday are in the purple area as well, the state will actually look back at the last 10 days. And if they see an improvement in our numbers, they will then not bump us into the purple tier. We'll actually get to stay in the red, less restrictive tier where we are right now. So it's incredibly important right now that people are wearing a mask, they're watching their distance to other people, they're washing their hands, that they're avoiding crowds. When they gather safely, and outside is always better than inside, and that they're getting tested for COVID. That's really important that people do that right now.
Great reminder. Let's head over to Dr. Sarah Noguchi, Superintendent of Modesto City Schools. Sarah, when will Modesto City Schools reopen, and what will your reopening plans look like?
Perfect. Thank you. And thank you for inviting me here today. I know that venues like this is really important to be able to get our message out. There's a lot of questions out there in the community, so appreciate the invitation today. So we are very excited to report that we will begin opening schools next Monday, and that is November 12th for preschool through second grade. We will begin moving our third through sixth grade November 30th. We are looking at secondary options at our board meeting on Monday, but the recommendation moving forward for our secondary schools is to open our 7-8 as soon as we are in the red tier for 2 consecutive weeks. Much like Julie just mentioned, it's really important that we do our part in getting us to and maintaining ourselves in the red. However, because we're moving towards the end of the semester and into the holidays, the earliest that we are recommending that we're opening is January 19th. That gives us 1 week back from our holiday break to then hopefully begin opening middle school, and then 2 weeks later our high school.
So we'll stay with you for just a moment, Dr. Noguchi. You talked for a second about the junior highs and high schools and the reopening plan. So if the soonest they would open could be January, but we go back into the purple tier, what happens then?
If we go back into the purple tier, we will stay in a distance learning model for our 7th, 8th, and then also high school. As soon as we move into the red, and at some point we will move back in the red, as you know, as Julie has mentioned before, if we're in the purple, we're unable to open up our secondary schools, but we can once we hit the red tier. So our recommendation to the board for Monday is to open our secondary as soon as we have 2 consecutive weeks in the red, and then we'd open that following Monday, whenever that is. And that could be January 19th, or that could be February or March. It just depends upon really what we do as a community and how safe we are with the health and safety protocols that have been outlined for us.
Thank you, Dr. Noguchi. We've got a lot of questions for both districts. Want to get over to Dana Trevathon with Turlock Unified School District as well. Dana, there's a lot of questions from parents for you as well. What other districts that have returned in TOSD are you partnering with to see how it's going? And what have been their experiences and takeaways during those conversations?
Okay, great. And like Sarah mentioned, I appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening and to get this information out to our community. So consistently, superintendents come together once a week on Fridays, and we share experiences in terms of our strategies. Of course, our county is made up of small, middle-sized, and large schools, and I would say that our takeaways are mostly those with like numbers. So for Turlock Unified, we pay particular attention to Modesto City Schools, Ceres Unified, Patterson Unified, and we talk about those things that we're doing to engage students and bring students and staff back safely. I can tell you that at our secondary level right now, we're doing our best to bring back small learning groups of students with acute needs, specifically targeting those with special needs, those who are struggling with connectivity, social emotional needs, as well as those who are struggling academically and are high on our DNF list. Back students at the secondary level in small learning groups earlier this week.
A lot of questions around reopening and what is allowed to reopen and when. So I'm going to ask you to elaborate on what you just started to talk about. This question says, does Turlock Unified see a return for our students and school at any point? And I know you mentioned small groups now. Technically, red tier schools may open, the question says. So why haven't secondary schools reopened while Stanislaus County is in the red tier? And what are reopening plans? It's a long question, so sorry about that.
Thank you. So about a month ago, we had established a reopening plan for our secondary 712 schools. And in working with guidance from public health, we realized that opening secondary schools is nowhere the same as opening elementary schools, and establishing and maintaining small learning cohorts is a real challenge when you're talking about 6 periods a day, 30 students. The student has 6 teachers, so our focus started in the area of how could we effectively contact trace and keep students safe, making sure that they leave campus before eating. And so we're establishing a grab-and-go lunch process. Our timeline right now, I've made a commitment to our community that our goal was to start bringing students back at the secondary level during the month of November in some capacity, and we're doing that. We started bringing back students this week. In those small learning cohorts. We're going to do that up until winter break, and then reevaluate so that we are prepared to teach students simultaneously at home and in person, so that families are comfortable choosing to keep their children, their secondary students at home, or if they're comfortable returning them to school in person in a blended model fashion.
A lot of these questions pertain to both school districts. I wanted to give Sarah a chance to address that as well.
There's something I'd like to add on that Dana had just mentioned. You know, when we talk about elementary schools versus secondary schools, 2 really different structures and a lot of different dynamics. But another piece to that is also the size. It's very different if you're looking to open up a student group of 2,000 or 3,000 compared to where our districts are in the tens of thousands. So for Modesto City Schools, it's 30,000. So something that I just want to showcase for parents and community, if we think back to the pandemic in April and we were out getting things in the grocery stores, and we go to the grocery stores and there were empty shelves because there was either hoarding going on or what have you, whatever the circumstance was. At the very beginning of this pandemic in the summer, we went to put in vast orders in the areas of 1,400 cases of filters for our HVAC system. We ordered canopy tents for outside to help students be outside, 24 cargo containers so we can take desks from the outside and put and store those, 50,000 desk shields, 500 portable air purifiers, 700 TV screens. So all of those are put out and in the system, and in just the supply chain in order to be able to get those ordered and into the district and then up and available, it really takes some time. And at this time, we don't have everything as of yet for our secondary, but we do for our elementary, and therefore we are also moving forward with our elementary. So it's more than just flipping a switch. It truly takes a lot to ensure health and safety protocols are covered for our students and our staff.
Thank you so much. It's clear the districts have put a lot of time and preparation into making sure that we're safe going back. Let's go to Julie Falkenstein, our public health nurse. Now that schools are starting to reopen, does public health expect there to be a massive increase in spread as a result of this decision?
That's not something that we've seen in other communities when schools have opened. It is something that we're watching for here locally. The key, again, is that everybody remembers to keep their guard up, that they're wearing their mask, they're practicing social distancing, they're washing their hands, they're avoiding large groups. I probably am going to sound like a broken record there, but that really is important because our schools will be safe for opening if our community has a lower case rate.
Julie, I want to stay with you because a lot of the reopening plans for schools really hinges on you're working with them. I know you've been working behind the scenes a lot with the school districts, and if the county metrics stay in the purple tier range, what happens then?
With the schools that have opened, they will continue to stay open. If we return to the purple tier, things like indoor worship and indoor dining and indoor gyms will close again. Outdoor will still be available to us, but we will see that, and movie theaters will close. So we will see those restrictions return if we remain in the purple tier.
Can you talk about what will happen with the schools if we go to purple again from red, but schools have reopened?
So once schools have opened, they're allowed to stay open. So they don't need to worry about closing schools again. We may have some cases where we will have a classroom return to distance learning if there has been an exposure in that classroom. If there's a lot of school transmission, we might have an entire school return to distance learning for 14 days and then come back. But we won't be closing schools.
Thank you, Julie. Let's head over to Dr. Noguchi with Modesto City Schools. This question came in from a parent. The parent is asking, Modesto City Schools is looking to implement a hybrid program that includes in-class instruction and distance learning. What is the hybrid plan supposed to accomplish is the first question. We'll go with that question for now, and I'll ask you the second part of that question.
Perfect. So the hybrid model, the benefit of the hybrid model is it allows parents to have choice. So in a hybrid model, the student could either choose to come to school 2 days a week and then have distance learning 3 days a week, or they could choose to stay home the entire time. The benefit for this is we've heard from our parents, we've heard from our students, is the social emotional aspect of students being isolated in their homes is a real concern and an issue. So this does allow for some of the social emotional aspects for the student.
Okay, and the second part of that question is, what advantage is there in being in the classroom 2 days per week, and why should I commit to this over what we are doing now?
And I guess that's the piece which is the social emotional aspect of it. So kids have the opportunity to see their teachers, they have the opportunity to see other students, go out to recess. I mean, there's still some socialization that is going on, so that truly is the benefit. But I think the overarching benefit for parents is there's choice. It could be that for a month they are comfortable with coming into school, and then we get past the holidays and they choose that they want to keep their child home. They'll be able to do that and still maintain the same teacher.
Dr. Noguchi, why not open all 5 days as some other schools are doing?
Opening all 5 days would require that our facilities greatly increased. In order for us to have, and Dana touched on this earlier, we need to have stable cohorts. That means we need to have a set of students, let's say a third grade group of students, stay together in their classroom and at recess and at lunchtime and in dismissal, where they stay together. Bringing them together 5 days a week, we just frankly don't have the capacity to be able to split the class in half. We would need to have double the size. So that's why we're not bringing them back 5 days.
We'll stay with you for one more
Sure.
question, but this question actually could be posed to both school districts. This question is, what will the in-person learning look like?
So in-person learning, we right now are looking and working with our teachers to provide them support in what in-person learning looks like. I can say for a student it is going to look very different. They're going to come into the classroom. They will be seated at their own desk. They will have what we call a desk shield. They will be the only one that sits at that particular desk. A teacher will have, depending upon the skill level and the technology level of that teacher, we've divided it really into, let's say, a 4-tiered system. The first tier being very minimal technology skills. We have the supports that we can provide that teacher to learn advanced skills in that technology, all the way up to the 4th tier, which is a teacher that can really work magic as it relates to technology. So we're really going to have a wide range of technology abilities for our teachers, but we're going to be here to help and support them as they further develop their skills.
Thank you so much. Let's go to Dana with Turlock Unified. Some parents have asked, or have heard rather, that if the schools cannot hold the number of students returning to classes, those students may be placed in different schools. Is this the case? And how will the alternate school sites be determined?
So unfortunately, that is the case in some situations. What happened was after we secured commitments from parents, household dynamics changed, or the circumstances in families changed. And although we had made it very clear that commitments would be held, we did our best to accommodate families who did change their minds. But when they changed their minds, we had already positioned staff at the schools, and so we had to make some quick decisions on how to accommodate those students. So although they continue to be an established student at that school of residency, they may be in another teacher's class virtually and in person throughout the district. And the way we've selected those, it's just been space availability at that particular grade level.
Dana, I think you probably touched on this, but there's another question from a parent. For parents that don't know what the amount of students returning per class looks like, can you share class size information and what the district will do to ensure that students remain in class with their one teacher?
Sure. So at this point right now, it's hard to predict the number of students allowed in a classroom. We're doing our best, and the plans will be to make sure that we maintain 6 feet of distance, and where we can't, we will provide barriers. We are, at this point in time, bringing back small learning cohorts, and those have up to 16 individuals who are in a specific location and upholding social distancing guidelines. So dependent on the size of the classroom and the number of students who are in person, we will make those adjustments to make sure that we're upholding social distancing guidelines with either the plexiglass barriers, all students required to wear masks, and of course proper ventilation.
So I'm sorry, Dana, we had an issue with the video and it wasn't pointed towards you when you answered that question. So we're being asked to repeat the question. Okay. Apparently we're going to stop and take a pause here. Did you stop? Or we? Okay. So we're going to restart the show in a moment. We're having some technical difficulties. So hang on, and we're going to pick up right where we left off after this question in just a moment.
Welcome back to Stanislaus County Office of Emergency Services live Q&A with two of our larger school districts within the county. Thank you for bearing with us as we deal with some technical difficulties behind the scene. We want to pick up with Dr. Sarah Noguchi with Modesto City Schools, getting a lot of questions about schools within the county. Sarah, I wanted to ask you, what are your district's plans for lunches and recesses?
So lunches and recess for the preschool through sixth grade is going to look very different than our secondary. At secondary, we're still working through what that will look like at the individual site levels. You know, something to consider, we've got 22 different elementary schools, and some of them range in size from 300 all the way up to 1,200, and so it's going to look very different at each school. So what I can say is they will be unique at each school, but there will be some consistency. One, we will maintain the cohort that we talked about earlier, so we need to maintain each grade level cohort. We are going to be having grab and go lunches, so kids grab their lunch and they go out to an area that they stay together in their cohort. Nutrition services is still going to work with families and students to ensure the nutrition sensitivities, if you will, for individual students is maintained as we move forward. Recess is the same, again, maintaining the cohorts. They will be able to go outside, they will be able to have equipment, but the equipment will stay within the cohort itself and be cleaned each evening, but it will not be shared with any other grade level other than the ones that's out there. So while we still can maintain some activities that is related to school, and that is your academic learning and your recess and your lunches, it's still all going to look very, very different. But we are going to really stay tight with our health and safety protocols to ensure that we don't have any additional spread within the community.
Thank you. Along the lines of health and safety protocols, a lot of parents are concerned about sanitation and cleaning procedures. Can you talk for a moment about what your plans are in that area? And then we'll go to Turlock Unified for the same question.
I'm not an expert by any means with this. Mr. Zerley, who is our Chief Business Officer, definitely has a handle on this. But overarching, we have spent hundreds of hours really thinking through what the protocols will be on cleaning. As a result of the cohorts, because we will have a cohort Monday, Tuesday, and then Thursday, Friday, we will deep clean to the extent possible on Wednesday in that evening. Each evening, we will also have our schools cleaned. We have hired additional custodial staff, and actually you will see signs all over the town looking for custodians. So if folks out there looking for work, we are hiring additional custodians and sub-custodians, so we're looking for that. Additionally, we are looking for equipment that can help us sanitize large-scale areas. I think they're called foggers, where we can do large-scale areas in the area for lunches and outside equipment, and also the classrooms as a whole.
Sarah, we'll stick with you for just a moment. There's some questions about masks. And so this question is, how will the teachers handle a student who is refusing to wear a mask? And will there be discipline for students who do not comply?
Absolutely. You know, masks, as we have all seen in our community, that is a really sensitive one. But we also recognize that masks are one of the number one mitigators to this spread. When we first got into planning for opening schools, we really thought that we couldn't have, our youngest children wear masks. So that's just not something that they would do. But what we have seen, as some schools have opened up and our preschools have opened up, we actually do see kids wearing masks and keeping them on. Certainly we have to train them and what that looks like and what's the protocols for that. So we are going to require all kids, with the exception of some medically fragile students that have medical permission to not wear masks, but all other site staff and children will wear them. And if for some reason they just are really struggling and they are unable to wear them, we will work with the student on proper use. But if it still comes down to their inability to be able to make that happen, then they will need to go to 100% distance learning. So again, the nice thing is we have a choice. You can either wear your mask and we'll support and help you with that, or you need to stay home until a time that you're more comfortable in wearing a mask 100% of the time.
Thank you so much. Let's go to Dana with Turlock Unified School District, and we'll ask the same question that we asked to Modesto City Schools. First of all, what will your cleaning procedures look like at Turlock Unified when you reopen? And then how will you handle students who refuse to wear masks?
very similar to Sarah's comments. The only thing that I would add in terms of our sanitation and cleaning efforts is that we have begun hiring sanitation or temporary sanitation experts, and those individuals will be specifically assigned to each campus with the focus of making sure that restrooms, contact areas, surface cleaning is conducted every 45 minutes to support the efforts that we already have going on with our custodial staff. Additionally, we've heightened record keeping in terms of logs for sanitation and making sure that those routines and systems are conducted on a daily basis. In terms of students wearing masks, I think Sarah hit it on the head when she said we're doing everything we can to work with families and students. The last thing we want to do, it took us this long to get students back. The last thing we want to do is send them home. And so, for the younger children, this is very different, and it's training them to be able to keep a mask on for lengthy periods of time. And as much as we want every student to be able to stay and do that safely, we have to recognize that some may not be able to, but we're going to give them every opportunity to come along with us before, asking them to remain at home in distance learning.
Dana, we'll stick with you. Another question from a parent with Turlock Unified. If we do return with the 2-day model proposed by TUSD for secondary grades, will the 2 days be set up so that it ends by noon? That's the first part of the two-part question, so we'll go with that one for now.
Okay, I'm sure. So the Stanislaus Board of Education has advised us for safety protocols that it is very wise to make sure that our students, especially because we're on such a very large campus, our comprehensive high schools and junior high and middle schools are very large, that the safest thing would be to have them do some sort of a grab and go and then exit campus, because we all know students are excited to see each other, and the task of keeping them separate and safe while they're eating would be very difficult. So yes, that is currently the plan, that they would be leaving between 12 and 12:30 sometime with a grab and go lunch protocol.
And I think you've already addressed the second part of that question, so we'll turn it over to you, Amy.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to public health. Julie Falkenstein, a lot of people are still confused about COVID-19, the nature of the virus. Can you talk for a moment about how we can tell the difference between what is the flu, now that we're coming up on flu season, and what is COVID-19 when the symptoms are so similar? How is this virus different than the seasonal flu?
So that's a really good question, and it's one that is going to challenge us this winter. Both are contagious respiratory illnesses. They're caused by different viruses. They have some different prevention methods to them. The key difference is that COVID-19 seems to be spread more easily than the flu, and it causes more serious illness in some people. It takes longer for people, COVID-19 also takes longer for people to show symptoms than the flu, and so they're contagious for longer as well. A really important difference is that we have a vaccine against the flu, and we don't have one against COVID. So it's really important, particularly this year as we're working to figure out what's flu and what's COVID, that everybody gets their flu vaccine this year. So the symptoms between the flu and COVID are similar. I think we're going to put a link in the comments that goes to a CDC webpage that actually outlines the differences between some common winter illnesses like strep throat and the flu and COVID. COVID can include the flu. The symptoms of the flu are also the symptoms of COVID, and COVID has additional symptoms like loss of taste or smell. So it's COVID's like one step farther than the flu in symptoms as well. The risk for children and complications in children is higher for the flu actually than it is for COVID. However, infants and children with underlying medical conditions are at increased risk with either the flu or with COVID. And also with children, we've noticed something called the multisystem inflammatory syndrome that is unique to COVID, and it's rare, but really not good for kids to get, and that is unique to COVID that the flu doesn't have. Really, I think the key difference, other than COVID seems to be a little more severe in a lot of areas, is that flu vaccine, and making sure people get the flu vaccine so that we don't have flu spreading in our community at the same time we have COVID spreading.
We also have questions about testing. Are we still offering free testing in the county? Where would someone get a free COVID-19 test if they think that they have been exposed or just want to make sure that they are not infected?
We do indeed still have free testing. We have a location in Salida, one in West Modesto, and one in Turlock. And then there's testing locations throughout the county in things like pharmacies and urgent cares, and then just your regular doctor's office. But the 3 county free sites are those 3 locations. You can go to stanislauscounty.com/coronavirus, and you will find a link to the testing locations, and you can get signed up. Something that I think is particularly nice as a user of the free test sites is that we've gone from the really deep nasal testing where it feels more like a brain biopsy to one that happens more in the midsection of your nose. And so it's a lot more comfortable. When I had mine done last week, it kind of felt like I was getting water sprayed up my nose. I mean, it feels funny, but it doesn't hurt. And so that I think is really important for people to know, that it's not quite as traumatic as that first test was.
Thank you, Julie. Let's go to Dr. Noguchi. A lot of questions about how things will go when schools reopen, obviously. And one parent asked what the protocols will be for communicating when there's a positive student or faculty test result.
We believe that there's a positive case. We work closely with public health in really the protocols and contact tracing for that individual. If a student is tested positive or a teacher is tested positive, everyone in that classroom's parents will be notified. If we have further spread outside that particular classroom, then we would notify the entire school community at large and parents. So it just depends upon the level of spread. But if it's just one in a classroom, which we have seen, because we've been back at school since mid-September with our learning hubs, and we've had a few, and we've had 1 or 2, and we let all the parents know, and then that way they have a choice and the information.
We'll stick with you for one more question, then we'll get over to Dana with Turlock Unified. But for Modesto City Schools, support for our students remains a top priority for districts. And we recognize that there are a number of homeless and foster students, as well as vulnerable special education students, especially at the secondary level. Can you tell us what Modesto City Schools is doing to support these students during this time, since secondary schools still remain closed?
Absolutely, and I think I've alluded to it a little bit, and I know Dana is doing the same over in Turlock, and she certainly could speak to that. But we recognized early on that there were students, our foster youth, our homeless, our severe special ed student, and a few of those students that frankly just for whatever reason would not get on the computer. We know if a student is logged on the computer or not. There's no one that can hide with the systems that we have. And if after we're working with the parent and working with the student on a daily basis, if they don't check in, then we go knock on their doors. And if they still aren't coming onto the computer and getting enrolled in the class, then we bring them into what we call a hub. So we have our foster youth, homeless, special ed, and kids that just weren't connecting. So all of our schools currently have hubs. There's some schools that have 5 hubs. I think that's more on our high schools. But the hubs can only be as large as, I believe, 14. I could be off. It's small with 2 adults and 14 students. So far, they've been very successful. We will continue to increase the capacity, especially in our secondary level, as we're not working to open our secondary until January. At least that's the recommendation at this point. As we begin to open our elementary next Monday, we will stop learning hubs for elementary and then put some of those resources towards secondary.
Thank you for that information. Let's go to Dana. So we've talked a lot about students and families and how all of this change will impact them. Let's talk for a moment about teachers. Will teaching staff have the option of whether they want to continue with distance learning only or enter a blended in-person model? What does this reopen look like for the teachers?
currently, what it looks like for teachers is pretty much what it's looked like during the traditional regular year. Those teachers who do not have underlying health conditions or extenuating circumstances, they'll be returning to teach students in person in that blended model. We're looking to make sure that we can provide them the tools they need and the professional development to do that simultaneously in terms of teaching students in person and at home at the same time. However, we do recognize that we have many staff who have extenuating circumstances or underlying health conditions, so we're working through the interactive process with those individuals through our HR department to make sure that we continue to keep them engaged and working with students who may be in need of distance learning only.
Dana, we saw a couple of questions about this too. Will families still have the option to change their mind at a later time regarding the distance learning blended instruction style?
So, originally we said, oh no, a commitment's a commitment and your request is a request. We're not going to be able to change that. And I shared that earlier. We're doing everything we can to accommodate families. One of the things that we are asking parents who do change their minds or their students' needs change is to work with us in terms of making sure that it happens at an appropriate time, like the end of a grading period, because the last thing we want to do is jeopardize students' grades and at the secondary level transcripts as well as they're looking to move on. So that's really been the only request. In addition to space availability, sometimes an independent study class or a particular program class is full and we just have to wait till there's availability. But so far at this point in time, we've been able to accommodate most, if not all, but we do ask that they align it to the ending of the grading period.
Thank you so much. Let's go now to Dr. Noguchi. A lot of parents have asked throughout the summer, throughout the fall, what is happening with sports? And so now that our schools are reopening, will clubs and sports be able to resume in person?
We want more than anything to engage our youth with activities and sports and events and things that bring them together. We recognize the adults and the students are really suffering, and we need to make that possible to the extent possible. So I do know that sports competitions are planned to begin in December, but really public health is the one that supports us in the guidelines that we have in opening that up. So if we think about our secondaries right now, there is sports conditioning, and that's moving forward. We'll look to see how that plays out in December. If we continue on this path in having our numbers continue to increase, meaning we fall into the purple, then we have different decisions. So if we collectively as a community can slow the spread, then we have more options for our children. So as far as the elementary, we are looking at after-school activities. Again, social distancing in cohorts, and in the after-school activities, they are clubs and different events. So we will work on that for the elementary, and then high school, we'll see where we're at when we get there.
Dana, you got the same question. Are you at TUSD allowing clubs and sports at your schools, and will the allowable activities be modified, and if so, how?
So just to piggyback on what Sarah said, much of TUSD is similar to Modesto City Schools in terms of right now we're just allowing athletic conditioning, but with the hopes of having some sort of a modified season for our athletes come winter. It's everyone's hope. The only thing that I would also add, even when we do return to in-person instruction at the secondary level, we'll strongly have to consider club and activity type engagement, because again, trying to maintain those small, stable cohorts, it's going to take a great deal to get students back. And I think that for the most part, our focus will be on mitigating learning loss. And as much as we know those clubs and activities are critical, some of those things can continue to be done virtually and engage students that way. I can tell you that over the last couple of months, TUSD has brought back small learning groups in the areas of co-curricular activities, specifically at Turlock High School. We've brought back small learning cohorts with our NJRTC program for our shooting teams and our color guard, and we're modifying it and monitoring it very similar to how we're allowing athletic conditioning, social distancing, maintaining it outside, no more than 16 total people together at one time. We've also done something similar at Pittman High School with our viticulture course in maintaining the vineyards that are there. Again, kind of following and modeling what we're allowing for our athletes in terms of conditioning outside, 6 feet, social distancing, and a small stable cohort as well.
Thank you. So this question came up for both districts, so we'll again let you both answer this, but it's about the onboarding of students each day and the temperature scanning, health sign-off protocols. So how will that happen? Upon drop-off or before students enter the gates? What does that look like at TUSD? And then we'll go to Modesto.
So at the elementary level right now, we're aware that CDC does not recommend temperature checks simply because of the of the risk associated with students congregating together to make that occur. However, at our elementary sites, our staff are monitoring student temperatures before they enter the classroom. Staff are wearing gloves, the appropriate personal protective equipment. So we are doing that on a daily basis, and then in some other venues as well at the sites, but we're doing that consistently. Our hope is that parents are self-monitoring students before they leave, and if they show any signs or symptoms of being ill, that they're keeping them home and not having us be the ones who discover that.
Sarah, did you want to weigh in on that as well, on what the daily screening process will look for students, staff, and parents?
Interesting, we just did a video on this. We have a day in the life of a student, and we have one of our teachers' students who I believe is in 4th grade modeling what we need done, and that is we're asking staff and students to monitor their temperature, and if they're at 100.4 or above, we're asking that they stay home. And look to see if they have additional symptoms. But at this time, they were asking them to self-monitor. We also have on our buses, getting onto the bus, we have a temperature check. It looks about the size of an iPhone. So when you're walking up on all 40 of our buses, it actually says, put on your mask if you don't have a mask, and it scans your temperature. We are asking parents that are using bus services to remain at the bus until after the students are on the bus, because if they do have a temperature of 100.4 or more, then they need to go home at that time.
Thank you. So regarding the mask protocols and face shield protocols, are we going to be providing those for students or expecting them to bring their own?
Them for students and staff. I believe it's 3 cloth masks, but we have hundreds of thousands of other masks available, along with face shields. At the beginning of this, the rules keep changing, but at the very beginning we ordered roughly 10,000 face shields, and now we hear that we need to have, what are they called, Julie? A drape on it, so we're working to get some drapes on that. But the face shields are important, especially for our younger learners who really need to see our faces as they're learning to read and enunciate. And so, yes, they will be provided for both students and for staff.
I think you've touched upon this as well, Sarah, but this is probably a question that both you and Dana can answer for both Modesto City Schools and Turlock Unified. But when schools do reopen, what kind of support will the teachers receive to ensure that they can be successful in doing online and in-class instruction at the same time?
And that's the heavy lift right now, right? First off, I want to say to any teacher that's out there, I can't be more proud of the work that the teachers have done. If I reflect back to where we were in March and April, and I'm sure Dana will agree, the teachers have completely retooled how they teach. And it has been a heavy lift, and it's been a lot of tears, and it's been a lot of work, but they really have made me proud, and they really are doing a great job. As we move forward, we're retooling once again. So originally they were in the classroom with kids, and then they went to distance learning, and they had to completely retool what they do. And now we're asking them to do synchronous learning, which is teaching kids in front of them while also at home at the same time. It's synchronous. We are prepared with. We have a department called the Curriculum and Professional Learning Department. It's tooled with 40 different individuals. There's instructional coaches. They develop professional development. They meet one-on-one with teachers. They also work with principals and individual sites. We recognize teachers have different levels of technology, just like all of us in this room have a different level of technology. We're going to meet teachers where they're at. If they struggle with technology, that's okay. We're going to meet you where you're at. And if you could come and run this whole show here, we welcome you to help us with other teachers. So we really do have an infrastructure to be able to help and support, and we have the patience and understanding because I believe we're going to be here for quite a long time. I don't think this is just get through the spring. I think that we're going to be having some form of this learning and teaching for some time. So now's the time to learn what we need to learn, just like we did in the spring. And I'm confident our teachers are going to do fabulous work. They certainly are dedicated.
Dana, did you want to weigh in on that as well?
I'll add is I sometimes think that we have more belief in our teachers than they have in themselves, and I'll echo what Sarah said. They've made remarkable growth in their skills and their open-mindedness to learning something brand new and unfamiliar this year in comparison to last spring. And I have all the confidence they'll continue to do the same thing as they have to adapt and learn more, more and new and different skills. Like Modesto City Schools, we have a strong curriculum and instruction department with 2 rockstar ed tech coaches, an ed tech coach and an ed tech coordinator, and they have really taken it upon themselves to be a huge support and resource for staff to come along, learn those new skills. They're available during the day. They're continuously putting together webinars and tutorials so that teachers, as busy as they are and with their families, I think sometimes it's probably one of the last things that they do before they call it a night is learn on their own independently, and we're thankful that they have that desire and that will and skill to do it and grow with us, because it hasn't been easy for any of us, particularly our teachers.
It sure has not been easy. Thank you for that. Let's go back to Julie Falkenstein, our public health nurse manager. Public health was instrumental in approving the waivers of schools in Stanislaus County and districts, I should say. Will the team remain involved in ensuring compliance with the safety plan?
So public health doesn't have a regulatory role outside of approving waiver applications when that time was here, and then isolating positive cases and quarantining contacts. That said, public health has developed a very strong working relationship with all of our school districts, and that is something we are committed to maintaining. We're available to answer questions, to provide support. We have a group of resources that isn't going to go away. If there are concerns about schools meeting guidelines, we'll come alongside and help with that. And we don't have an enforcement role. Our role is strictly how do we help and how do we educate. But it's been really nice working with this group of people as we get our schools up and going again.
Sarah, I saw you nod your head too.
Add something. We've been on this journey together for 6 months, and I can say in the last 2 months, maybe 2 months, but working with Julie and being able to call her on her cell phone and getting answers, because things constantly change. We have a set of guidelines here, and then the next week it changes for whatever reason, not anyone's fault. It's just we're living in a pandemic. There's not a playbook for this. So I appreciate the partnership, and I appreciate her willingness to put herself out there in front of 40 superintendents that are highly charged and sometimes very agitated. She has been a great support, and I want to be on the record just thanking you for that, because I know it hasn't been easy on some of those Friday meetings, but we're all in this together, and I think it's a solid partnership.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Julie, we had another question for you too. This was an interesting question, and you touched upon the differences between the flu and COVID-19. So this was an interesting question from a parent. They want to know how staff will know the difference between those with a cold or virus and those with severe allergies. And if students suffer from allergies, how can you make them wear masks with constant sneezing and running nose?
It is a challenge. And I think particularly in the beginning of this, we know that COVID can present like allergies. We see that all the time. And so I think in the beginning and probably ongoing, what we'll see is if a child shows up at school with something that looks like a sudden onset of allergies, we're going to ask that child, the school is going to ask that child to go home and to get tested. It matters what kind of a test they get. So there's two different kinds, a rapid antigen and then a PCR test. And if they have a negative PCR test, they're welcome to come back to school. If we know a child has chronic ongoing allergies, that's definitely something that the school can work with the parent and the physician on, because we obviously don't want to send a child home every day that they show up for in-person class because they're shaking all the trees, and we know that this child always has allergy symptoms then. And so from that standpoint, I think that we will probably see more kids going home from school at this point, just because we know that with children, less severe symptoms present with COVID. As far as keeping that mask on, it's going to be a learning experience for everybody. The child can blow their nose. They can then use hand sanitizer. I will tell you, every plan that I've seen for the schools involve a lot of hand sanitizer and a lot of Kleenex. And so it's going to be something that we all just learn how to live with and live within. I think it's important that parents realize that they always have that option of distance learning as well. And so if mask wearing isn't working for that child and that family, they can do the distance learning as well.
Thank you, Julie. Let's go to Dana with Turlock Unified. This is a question that came in from a parent recently on Facebook. Currently, in distance learning, a lot of times teachers are not able to thoroughly explain an assignment in the current time frame they have. Several times, this parent says, my student has indicated his math teacher hasn't been able to explain the process to complete the assignments in one session. With the second day model, they would have to wait several days before the lesson is finished. So what can be done about this?
Asking that question, that's been a question that I've also fielded from many parents and staff members at the secondary level. So it's important to note that right now we're just in the draft stages of developing our secondary blended model, and our secondary principals are working with their site leadership teams in creating those. But one of the guidelines that we've asked them to make sure is embedded is that class periods are nearly twice as long as a regular class period during the traditional year. Although they're only meeting in person once a week for a class period, because we've divided the day in half, it's important to remember that an average class period can be anywhere between 45 and 57 minutes, and we're looking to have class periods that are an hour and a half. And in doing that, it will allow teachers to actually implement more of the into, through, and beyond, where there'll be opportunity for direct instruction, guided practice, checking for understanding, and small group work. And then it's also important to note that even though students are going to be on campus, for those who choose to, 2 days in person, they still will be meeting with the teacher 5 days a week. We're embedding afternoon instructional time in terms of intervention and opportunities for tutoring. And then our Wednesday, like Modesto City Schools, will look the same as it does right now, and that will be all students on distance learning. The other thing I think it's important to note is that we're currently working to implement evening advanced placement workshops. Those are virtual, but that's additional support and extended learning for students who are doing their best to meet the College Board expectations in terms of the rigor, and then being able to prepare them, for the exams at the end of the year.
I think we have just time for just a couple more questions. Sarah, you've talked about this here and there throughout this evening, but this parent just wants some follow-up. Some have experienced a lot of tech issues this year, and so how will this be addressed with teachers that who will have to simultaneously teach in person online?
Right. So just like tech tonight, right? We can't predict when we're going to have tech issues, and certainly at the beginning of the school year there were a significant amount of tech issues as we were working to get 30,000 students on and 5,000 employees on, and and the kids with connectivity. That has all been resolved, and certainly in the last, definitely 4, 5, 6 weeks, it is become much smoother. But we've also improved our practice as far as the support of the results. So currently we have a structure called a help desk, so you can call into a help desk if you had issues or concerned. As of last week, we've had 29,000 calls that have been resolved. We call them tickets that have been resolved since the beginning of the school year. Right now, there's 25 different folks picking up that phone and troubleshooting. The average call is 8 minutes, so hopefully there's that piece. Additionally, we have at the elementary schools, we have our computer tech teachers that are also there to be able to help and support the technology issues and concerns, and we have one at every single elementary school, which will be very helpful. And then lastly, we our technology team going out and helping and support and troubleshooting the individual student computers or teacher computers. So it's really all hands on deck. Certainly we're in a much better place. We also have an additional 15,000 Chromebooks now. So when we first started this craziness, we had all different types of computers. And we've learned that the Chromebooks are the ones that have the least amount of issues as far as the connectivity and the upgrades that need to happen in the evening. As of next week, we have an additional 6,000 computers that we're going to put out in 6 of our elementary schools to be able to switch out the old computers and get in the Chromebooks. And so this is going to be a work in progress continually. But I believe that we've built the infrastructure to be able to help and support. But it's going to happen.
Lots of change and transition and uncertainty. So we have to wrap up this show tonight, but let's just talk about for a moment, what are you hopeful about in all of this transition coming?
I am very excited and optimistic that finally, after 6 months of planning, hundreds, thousands of hours of planning and learning. I mean, who knew you had to learn about air ventilation systems and different types of sanitizer and everything. I mean, I've learned more about health and safety protocols than one would need to as a school administrator. But I'm really hopeful. We've gotten to a point now, starting Monday, we get to bring kids back, preschool through second. And then on the 30th, we get to bring back our third through sixth. And there will be a time that we get to do 7, 8, because really I think, what we're here for is to educate kids. And when we see kids and we see teachers with kids, it energizes us. So I'm very excited for next Monday as we continue to move forward. And I know that we will all get through this because I think we are now all working in a really close partnership, and we'll get through it together.
Fantastic. Well, that's all the time we have for questions tonight, but we want to thank all of our panelists for being here tonight and providing the community with an important update on the COVID-19 pandemic and the plan for schools as we transition between tiers in the county.
And thank you at home for sending in your questions. We had a lot of them this week. So if we didn't get to your question tonight, we'll continue to answer them in the social media update throughout the week. I also want to remind you at home, if you have questions specific to what's happening in your districts, check their websites.
And as a reminder, you can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. Just search for the keywords Stan Emergency.
Thanks again, everyone. Stay safe, healthy, and informed. Good night.